The Red Shoes by Hans Christian Andersen. There was once a little girl, very delicate and pretty, and yet so poor that in summer she always had to go barefooted, and in winter she had to wear big wooden clogs, which chafed her insteps most horribly, until they were quite red. In the middle of the village lived a shoemaker's widow, who had some strips of old red cloth, and out of these she did her best to sew a little pair of shoes. They were rather clumsy-looking shoes, but the old widow meant well. They were for the little girl, whose name was Karen. As it happened, she got the red shoes and put them on for the first time on the very day that her mother was buried. Of course, they weren't exactly the right shoes for a funeral, but they were the only ones she had, and so she wore them on her bare feet as she followed the humble straw coffin. Just then, a large old-looking carriage drove up with a large old-looking lady inside it. She caught sight of the little girl and felt sorry for her. So she said to the parson, "Look here, if you let me have the little girl, I'll take care of her." Karen thought this was all because of the red shoes, but the old lady said they were hideous and had them burnt. Karen herself was given nice new clothes and was taught to read and sew. People said how pretty she was, but the looking-glass said to her, "You are more than pretty, you are lovely." On one occasion, the Queen was passing through the country with her little daughter, who was a princess. People flocked around the castle, and Karen was there too, and the little princess showed herself at one of the windows. She was wearing a beautiful white dress. No train nor golden crown, but lovely red morocco shoes, far, far prettier than the ones the shoemaker's widow had made for little Karen. No, there was really nothing in the world like red shoes. But now Karen was old enough to be confirmed. She was given new clothes, and she was also to have new shoes. The best shoemaker in town took the measurement of her feet in his own private room, where there were big glass cabinets with elegant shoes and shiny boots. They made a brave shoe, but the old lady's sight was far from good, and so it gave her no pleasure. Among the shoes was a red pair just like the ones the princess had been wearing. Oh, they were pretty. The shoemaker explained that they had been made for an earl's daughter, but didn't quite fit. "That must be patent leather from the way they shine," said the old lady. "Yes, don't they shine," said Karen, and as they were a good fit, the shoes were bought. But the old lady didn't realize that they were red, for she would never have allowed Karen to go to confirmation in red shoes, and yet that's just what happened. Everybody stared at her feet, and as she walked up the aisle to the chancel, she felt that even the old pictures over the tombs, those portraits of the clergy and their wives in stiff ruffs and long black garments, were fastening their eyes on the red shoes. It was these that filled her thoughts when the priest laid his hand on her head and spoke of holy baptism, of the covenant of God, and of her duty now to become a fully-fledged Christian. And the organ played so solemnly, and the children sang so beautifully, and the old choir master sang too. But Karen thought of nothing but her red shoes. By the afternoon, sure enough, the old lady had heard from everybody about the shoes being red, and she said how shocking it was. They were quite out of place, and in future, when Karen went to church, she must always wear black shoes, however old they were. Next Sunday there was communion, and Karen looked at the black shoes, and she looked at the red ones, and then she looked at the red ones again, and put the red ones on. It was a beautiful sunny day. Karen and the old lady took the path through the cornfield, where it was a bit dusty. At the church door stood an old soldier with a crutch and a funny long beard, which was more red than white. In fact, it really was red. He made a deep bow to the old lady and asked if he might dust her shoes. And when Karen also put out her foot, "My, what lovely dancing shoes," said the soldier. "Stay on tight when you dance." And he gave the soles a tap with his hand. The old lady gave the soldier something for himself and went with Karen into the church. The whole congregation stared at Karen's red shoes, and so did all the portraits. And when Karen knelt before the altar and put the gold chalice to her lips, she thought of nothing but the red shoes. It seemed as if they were floating in front of her. She forgot to sing the hymns, and she forgot to say the prayers. Presently everyone came out of church, and the old lady stepped into her carriage. As Karen raised her foot to get in after her, the old soldier, who was standing close by, said, "My, what lovely dancing shoes." Karen couldn't resist. She had to dance a few steps, and, once she had started, her feet went on dancing just as though the shoes had some power over them. She danced round the corner of the church. She couldn't stop. The coachman had to run after her and pick her up and carry her back into the carriage. But still her feet went on dancing, and gave the kind old lady some dreadful kicks. At last they got the shoes off, and her legs kept still. When they came home, the shoes were put away in a cupboard, but Karen still kept taking a peep at them. By and by, the old lady fell ill. It was said she would never get better. She had to be nursed and cared for, and nobody was more suited for this than Karen. But a big ball was being given in the town, and Karen was invited. She looked at the old lady, who after all couldn't live long, and she looked at the red shoes. She couldn't see there would be any harm. She put on the red shoes. She had a perfect right to do that. But then she went to the ball and began to dance. But when she wanted to go to the right, the shoes went dancing off to the left. And when she wanted to go up the room, the shoes went dancing down the room. Down the stairs, through the street, and out by the town gate. Dance she did, and dance she must, away into the dark forest. Up among the trees she saw something shining. It looked like a face, and so she thought it was the moon. But it was the old soldier with the red beard, sitting and nodding and saying, "My, what lovely dancing shoes." This made her frightened, and she tried to kick off the red shoes, but they still stuck on tight. She tore off her stockings, but the shoes had grown fast to her feet, and so dance she did and dance she must, over field and furrow, in rain and sun, by night and day. But the night time was the worst. She danced into the open churchyard, but the dead didn't dance. They had something better to do. She wanted to sit down by the poor man's grave, where the bitter tansy grew, but peace and quiet were not for her, and when she danced towards the open church door, she found an angel there in long white robes, and with wings reaching from his shoulders to the ground. His face was stern and solemn, and in his hand he held a sword with broad shining blade. "Dance you shall," said the angel. "Dance in your red shoes until you are cold and pale, until your skin shrivels up like a skeleton's. Dance you shall from door to door, and at all the houses where the children are vain and proud, you shall knock till they hear you and are frightened. You shall dance, you shall dance." "Mercy, mercy," cried Karen, but she never heard the angel's answer, for her shoes whirled her away through the gate in the field, along highway and byway, dancing, dancing all the time. One morning she danced past a door she knew well. From inside came the sound of a hymn. Then out came a coffin all covered with flowers. She realized then that the old lady was dead, and she felt that now she was deserted by everyone, as well as cursed by the angel of God. Dance she did, and dance she must, dance on in the dark night. The shoes whirled her away over thorns and stubble, until she was scratched and bleeding. She danced across the heath up to a lonely little house. She knew that the executioner lived here, and she rapped the window pane with her knuckles and said, "Please come out. I can't come in because I'm dancing." "Do you mean to say you don't know who I am? I cut off wicked people's heads. My goodness, how my axe is quivering." "Please don't cut off my head," said Karen, "for then I can't show that I'm sorry for my sins. Cut off my feet with the red shoes." Then she confessed all her sins, and the executioner cut off her feet with the red shoes. But the shoes went dancing with the little feet across the fields into the depths of the forest. And he made her wooden feet and crutches. He taught her a hymn, the psalm for sinners, and she kissed the hand that had wielded the axe and went her way across the heath. "Surely by now I must have done penance for the red shoes," she said. "I'll go to church and let everyone see me." And she did. She went quickly towards the church door, but when she reached it, there were the red shoes dancing in front of her, and she grew frightened and turned back. All the next week she was miserable and did nothing but cry. But when Sunday came round, she said to herself, "Dear me, I really feel I've been through enough. Surely I'm just as good as many of those that sit so perkily there in church." And she plucked up her courage and started off, but she got no further than the gate, when she saw the red shoes dancing in front of her, and she grew frightened and turned back and repented deeply of her sins. Next she made her way to the parsonage and asked to be taken in there as a servant. She would work so hard and do her very best. She never gave a thought to the wages, only that she might have a roof over her head and be with kind people. The parson's wife felt sorry for her and took her into her service and found her hard-working and sensible. In the evenings Karen sat and listened in silence while the parson read aloud from the Bible. All the little ones were very fond of her, but when there was talk of dress and finery and of being as pretty as a picture, she would shake her head. The following Sunday they all went to church, and they asked her to go with them. But with tears in her eyes she looked sadly at her crutches, and when the others went off to hear the word of God, she went alone to her tiny room, where there was just enough space for a bed and a chair, and here she sat devoutly reading her prayer book. As she did so, the wind brought the sound of the organ to her from the church, and her eyes filled with tears as she lifted up her face, exclaiming, "Help me, O God." Then the sun came out so brightly, and straight in front of her stood the same angel in white robes that she had seen that night at the church door. But instead of the sharp sword, he was holding a beautiful green bough that was covered with roses, and he touched the ceiling with it so that it arched itself higher, and where he touched it there shone a golden star, and he touched the walls so that they grew wider, and she saw the organ, which was still playing. She saw the old pictures of the clergy and their wives, and the congregation sitting in the carved pews and singing from their hymn books. You see, the church itself had come to the poor girl in her narrow little room. Or was it she who had come to the church? She was sitting in the pew with all the others from the parsonage, and when they finished the hymn and looked up from their books, they nodded to her and said, "It was right you should come, Karen. It was God's mercy," she answered. And the organ pealed forth, and the young voices of the choir sounded so soft and pure. The bright, warm sunshine streamed in through the church window to the place where Karen was sitting. Her heart was so full of sunshine and peace and joy that at last it broke, and her soul flew on the sunbeams to heaven, where there was no one to ask about the red shoes.